if you take the point of view of the people who are running these plants and some of the conglomerates, they would tell you that small dairy farms, family dairy farms, are antiquated, obsolescent, inefficient, and really have no business being in operation, according to the standards and the management of how they make food and what they do with milk, which is volume, where everyone's milk from everywhere goes into one giant pool of millions and millions of pounds and gets made into millions and millions of pounds of food. Now, if you take a farm like ours, which is very small, you would find out that this milk by itself is of an incredibly high quality. But if you take it and you dump it into a truck with a lot of other milks and it goes to a factory, it basically reaches a standard far lower, and all the milk becomes homogeneous to what's going on. It loses individual flavor, character, terroir, things to do with where that milk is, who made it, what the animals were eating, what was going on, the basics of the source of that food. Well, our realization, and it took a lot of being beat on the head, was that we were never going to make it as dairy farmers again like we did 50, 80, 100 years ago. The system wasn't going to work for us. And in analyzing it and trying to figure out a way to crack the nut, we figured out that the only thing that was really wrong with it was the price that we got for our milk. That if we got a better value when they took the milk away, we could meet costs, we could meet production costs, we could actually pay for things. And so what we decided to do was to take matters into our own hands, to no longer allow big business to market a small farm's milk, to figure out the distinction in the product that we were making in a way we could get it to people that would bypass the industrial food system. If you're a vegetable farmer or a fruit farmer, when you finish the growing season and you harvest, you have a finished product. The watermelon, the tomato, the apple, the celery, they're complete. I can hand it to you. The market can hand it to you. Nothing has to happen to it other than distribution from growth from agriculture. The difficulty with dairy farming and the difficulty with milk production is that it's milk, it's 87% water, it's 13% milk solids, proteins and fats. It costs a lot to transport. It's an inefficient food in that state. It's an incomplete sentence when it leaves the farm. It's just fluid milk. It doesn't have any significant value until it gets to the factory. So for every dairy farm everywhere, there's a factory between the farm and the consumer, between the farm and the market. It needs a transformation. That transformation gives it the value, significant value, actually incredible value. And that's what we figured out. We were looking for models to make our farm work independently outside the system that we knew was broken and that could no longer market us, could no longer take advantage of who we were, and was essentially, in the way we were being treated, like a lot of other farms, in the price that we were being paid, we were basically being told to quit, go away, stop. What you're doing is ridiculous. And we begged to differ. We understood that by grazing our cows, as long as the grazing season would allow, by feeding them dry hay, dried cured grasses, fresh spring water, by rotationally grazing these animals, moving around, getting them as much sunshine as possible, we were recreating, as close as you could in a modern time, the natural state for these domesticated animals to produce a high-quality milk that turned into a terrific food. We decided to market ourselves that way, to make our own food. The model we observed, because we were looking at the history of milk and the history of food, to essentially reinvent ourselves, was the late 19th century, early 20th century creamery model, which in places like the state of New York, every single village everywhere had a creamery. The farmers then just put the cans on their carts, took them the half a mile or whatever it was to town, and there it was processed into turned to food, and that food fed the entire community. It gave jobs to the people of the community from those farms. It was distributed essentially locally. That model worked. That was a time when those farms could be sustainable in that system. And we said, you know, let's look at the best parts of that and see if we can update it into where we are today. And that's essentially what we did. We built our own micro creamery, our own food system to be able to get our milk, turn it immediately into food, and get it to people somehow. That's a difficult thing to do, and it was difficult from the point of view that people thought that that model that was broken, which is why they changed it. What you'll find in the food industry, especially with dairy, is that a lot of people go into cheese making. And that's just the natural inclination. In fact, farmers either want to bottle their milk or turn it into cheddar cheese. When we began our project to figure out how we were going to get the most value out of this quality milk we were making, we essentially made every kind of dairy food we possibly could just to see what tasted best, see what was the hardest to make, what, you know, it was, what the yield was. And we found out that making cheese is a whole lot of work. I mean, it's just a whole lot of work. And if you're going to be very small like we are, and we're incredibly small, you got to make a bunch of cheese, and you got to sell it for a whole lot of money. And you got to convince people to pay a lot of money for that pound of cheese, because a gallon of milk makes 1 pound of cheese. A gallon of milk weighs 8.6 pounds, and a pound of cheese weighs 1 pound. That means that 7.6 pounds disappears of the volume that you use to make that 1 pound of cheese. So you're not getting very good yield out of your gallon of milk. You're dumping most of it away. You're dumping the water out. That's the way. You're getting that cheese, which is good value, but if you're going to have to sell that pound of cheese that you made, what's it going to sell for? $20, $30, $35? You have all this work into this thing. And so, you know, we look at dairy farming and farming. I've always characterized it in some of the brighter moments as being an exquisite prison, because it is. Farming is an epic endeavor. It happens, and it keeps going, and especially with cows and animals where you have to be cared for all the time, and you have to be responsible in every single way to these creatures and the food that they produce, you realize as a farmer that you got to get the most out of your time, and you got to get the most value out of your products. And in this case, cheese making was not the way to go. It was just too much work. We found out that cultured foods, yogurts, the antique foods, the antique fermented foods, the oldest foods that we found in the encyclopedia of dairy foods, so to speak, were not only the healthiest, but they were also the easiest to make at the best conversion with the highest yield. It made sense. We were trying to cut our labor. We were trying to get good value for what we were doing as farmers, and we were trying to beat the system, really, the system that was beating the hell out of us. A lot of the difficulties that farmers have, not only in vegetables but in other categories, is they can be great farmers, but they don't know anything about marketing, or they're just unable to market, or it confuses them. So when a farmer begins a project like I described, it's a real leap of faith, that because you don't know what's going to happen. We had no idea what we were doing, whether it was going to be accepted or not. And in truth, when our foods first started coming out in small batches, people were losing their minds everywhere we took them, each tasting we went to, each farmer's market or each store. And there was so much enthusiasm that it was confusing to us, because when we were looking at these foods were really normal. There was nothing to them. They were just wholesome, essential, authentic recipes that hadn't been messed with, that weren't industrial, but there was nothing behind them, no mystery. And we realized that if you bring people essential, real food that hasn't been adulterated in any form, and you give it to them, their bodies, everything will respond with such enthusiasm that they will try to get everything you make. And that's what happened to us. We really only make a small volume of foods. We sell locally here. We sell in Manhattan. We sell at our farmers market. And we are sold out before we make anything all the time. And that's an astonishing truth to us, because we're one little farm in East Otto, New York, doing something that farmers used to do everywhere all the time, but almost none are doing anywhere. In Wyoming County in New York State, it's the largest milk producing county. It's the largest agricultural producing county in New York. Just billions of dollars worth of milk. Not one drop of milk in Wyoming County is made into food in Wyoming County. Makes no sense. What's happened is the farmer has relinquished the making of the food, the understanding of the milk that he produces, and everything that can be in possibilities to market and feed people. He's handed this over to the factories in a way that has disempowered him. That's taken his perspective away. It's put him into the less than an exquisite prison where he's forced to work every day for not even minimum wage, essentially just to feed the factories. So our example is a small farm beginning at this point where we are realizing the potential of this project that we took on that was nothing more than a look in the rearview mirror of 100 years ago to try to establish something that would work today. We know now from the type of response that we get everywhere, through emails, through personal contacts, through people that just come up to us and just start losing their minds and say, your food is so amazing. And we accept that with humility. And what we really want to say is, relax. This could be everywhere. It could be everywhere. Thanks very much.